70s, or the guy that did the sarin gas attacks, the Om Shinri. Those people are madmen, but they are enormously charismatic, and he is an enormously charismatic guy. And he has that, you feel something in his presence.
They used to call it the reality distortion zone around Steve Jobs. So that's probably what was going on here.
Yeah, exactly.
His confidence and his charisma was distorting people's ability to keep a grip on reality.
Yeah, absolutely right. So we're in the presence of this guy, and this whole group is building up into this super Hopium stage, and the cracks are appearing, but I'm very invested by this time. I've spent all these thousands of dollars getting delegates to Indonesia. I've spent, well, by that time, just over a year working around the clock, 20 hours a day, right?
It's very hard when you've made that kind of investment to suddenly turn around and go back,
Yeah, so I just could not, the cracks were there, but I could not cope at that stage psychologically with the cognitive dissonance that those cracks were producing. So I went with the Hopium. I went with the little group stadium buzz of watching your favourite team, kick that winning goal and go, yay, all together, and having that buzz, And then we'd come back from Sugi's place and we'd be at the hotel talking all night amongst each other, and all these people that we'd video conferenced with for over a year from all over the world were there, and they were there in the flesh, and, we were like, wow, meeting our family. Feel good times. Yeah. And so we're sitting under the balmy Indonesian warm, skies outside in the Fleabag Hotel and having these, 20-cent coffees, which were great, and, orange juices, and we're sitting there talking to these people that were our co-brothers and sisters, chosen ones of God who're going to change the world, and we're all together. There's this big bloody group hug going on, and so that was containing my cracks, and a couple of nights later, another really major crack appeared, because one of the South African delegates had been talking to Roxanne Meadows of the Venus Project. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
A little bit.
Yeah, Jacques Fresco's sort of thing. He wants us all to live in Future Town. Anyway, and have the needs-based economy and all that sort of stuff. And all of a sudden, in a meeting, Sugi says, I've decided we're going to go to the Venus Project now. No.
Wow.
And I'm sitting there, and me and my closest friend and colleague, who was we had Prime Minister, and we had CEO and Prime Minister and Emperor, and he was the Prime Minister and I was the CEO at that stage. And there was Ross, John, and myself, and
was this the first group eye roll you had, where people were all rolling their eyes at the same time?
Yeah, well, John and I were, and John and I looked at each other, and I made an excuse of feeling ill, and I got one of the Indonesian guys to drive us back to the hotel, and we were really, reeling, because John was a staunch OPPT guy, and he almost lost his house. He actually did lose his house. He was foreclosed and thrown out of his house at one stage, but he managed to get his life back on track and get stuff sorted and get money and start a business and start paying it off again. So but anyway, we're there and we're looking at each other and we're just going, we didn't come here for the Venus Project. But then the next day was the Super Seminar event. And we went to the Super Seminar event, and imagine, that you're in this hot, balmy, tropical Asian country, full with poverty and dingy dwellings and bad food stands all along the road. And then you drive up to this magnificent, hyper-modern big building hotel, right? With this huge long driveway. And you drive down this driveway, we're all dressed in suits, and we all had to wear a suit for the event. And, I had to buy a suit before I went, I didn't own one because I'm not a suit sort of guy. So we're driving up to this magnificent, modern, big behemoth of a hotel, and we get out of the car, and here come all the Indonesian delegates that we'd heard about, and the Crown Council and Sugi's Advisory Council, and all these people come piling out and dressed up to the nines, and we walk into the hotel, and there is an honour guard on both sides of us, stretching through the whole long lobby of this long hotel up to the elevator and stairs, of these immaculately dressed, white dinner jacket, red sort of fezzy hats and black trousers, this honor guard of 120 Swissindo aficionados, Sugi's closest personal first group of Swissindo, people who are not part of the delegations, they're part of Sugi's close entourage. And
so this
they
is
are
opulent. This looks like the real thing to you at this point.
Yeah, this looks like the bloody real thing. All of a sudden, this cracks that had appeared the night before, they sort of vanished really quickly, because you got to think that the buzz amongst us when we got into that environment, this was getting more real by the second. We were getting hot and bothered, we were getting horny by then on the Hopium,
Yes, no doubt somebody had spent a lot of time and certainly some money in setting this whole thing up.
Yeah. So, and this is where I'm getting to. So we go through this honor guard, right? And into this big opulent hotel, and we go to this honor guard, and we go upstairs, and, the elevator is number 111, payments 1 to 11, everybody go, look, 111, the universe is telling us, giving us a sign, and, we're all in this Hopium buzz. And we get to this big conference room, and the footage is on the internet somewhere of this whole event. You can see me sign a piece of paper that I don't know what the hell it was in all its glory, which I revoke that signature and anything I did, by the way, officially. If anybody's listening, I revoke anything that I signed or did for Swissindo. I did all that as an employee of Swissindo, working for the man, not off my own bat, so I'm not personally responsible for it. That's just my little disclaimer I had to throw into this. Sorry, Cleve. So we were in this conference room, and all these speeches are going down, and these people, and I'd taken up the smoking habit, because I love the Indonesian clove leaf cigarettes, the gedam garang, yeah. And you couldn't get those in Australia, so I'd given up smoking, and Indonesia I started, they were like 20 cents, not 20 cents, or $1 a pack or something, and I just bought like 2 cartons and started puffing one after the other. And so, sitting in this big conference room with speeches going on in languages that you do not understand, you kind of, sneak out for a quick, fag. And, you get out of this conference room, and there's this, on top of this big building, and there's this big open terraced, sculptured sort of gardeny sort of terrace sort of luxury thing. And there's all these Indonesians there. And I walk out and I light up a garum, and this man goes, "Oh, you should try one of these, sir." And I'm going, "Well, you speak good English. Hello." And these are the guys that were wearing the white coats, or some of them, right? Mm-hmm. That were wearing the white coats and the honor guard and all that. And I'm thinking, hang on a minute, this guy speaks perfect English. And he said, "Oh, you should try one of this brand. They're Clove cigarettes, but they're even nicer than the Garams. Garams are for tourists. They have these. They're the real thing." So, thank you, I'll have the cigarette. And I started chatting to him. This man was a retired airline pilot. Mm-hmm. And then I realized that as I was sort of, the Westerners had great esteem in the eyes of the Indonesian Swissindo people. Mm-hmm. It was, they were just in awe of Sugi having established these Western delegations and all these Westerners coming in. You see, it was legitimizing in their eyes, which is the point I'm ultimately getting to. But,
so this is interesting. So the honor guard and all the folks in the white jackets, local folks, were a confirmation for you, but at the same time, you were a confirmation for them.
Yes, correct, exactly, and that's where we're going to get to with this. But these guys that I'm talking to, right, and they're all like, I want to shake to them, because it was also religious and spiritual, and we were the final icing on the cake that was going to make it all happen. We were very spiritual beings to them. So in order just to touch us, to touch our hand, I was shaking hands all morning because people wouldn't let go of my bloody hand because, there was spiritual transmission in that. I was a god, a living god, So the Hopium really kicked in on that stuff too. Here are all these people who want to, touch you because you're the fucking Messiah. Pardon my French. I get upset with myself.
It felt like that at the time.
Overdosing on all the Hopium,
Yeah.
And so, all these people on this balcony want to shake my hand and they want to, hear my story and who am I, and they want to tell me who they are, and lo and behold, a whole bunch of them speak English. Quite okay, thank you very much. And here all of a sudden I'm dealing with retired judges, retired military, retired lawyers, retired airline pilots. We're talking serious middle to upper class type people. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, big snotty hotel, all these upper crusty people, well-to-do Indonesians, which are Sugi's closest 120 dudes, closest, cohorts or whatever it is, his closest group, his first original group. So here are all these rich and middle-class people that speak very good English. In the scene, all of a sudden the scene has changed. And I'm thinking, this is what I thought after the conference. Still swept up in it all, right? And, we're doing this signing and all these speeches are going on, and this is the document that when it's signed, it sets everything in motion, right? This is it. When we get to this event, this is the event that we'd been building up to for well over a year. And this is the event, and we're here and we're going to sign this document. And so, we're milling about, getting up to get drinks and stuff like that, because even with the air conditioning in Indonesia, it's still hot in the room. You get sweaty and sticky and you need to drink a lot of water. So I'm walking up to the table with the libations and grabbing myself a drink, and there are three people there who didn't look Indonesian to me, but they were certainly of Asian origin. And they look more sort of Mongolian to me, so I thought those might be the Laos people. And I said, "Hi, I'm Peter. I'm the CEO for the Australian delegation. Are you the Laos delegation?" They said, "Yes." And so I met with 3 or 4 of them there. And he proceeded to tell me that at first he didn't want to believe in the collateral accounts, etc., but that the Laos intelligence service had done an intensive investigation into it and verified it to the Laos government that this was indeed true and this was indeed happening. And, they could go up there and, basically collect 138 trillion and get a fee for being the clearinghouse with their central bank for, the release of the payments, blah, blah, blah. So that, all my cracks that had appeared and my niggles about these middle class and upper class Swissindo supporters outside.
The mortar is put back in the cracks, huh?
Yeah, the mortar was put back in the cracks and the Hopium kicked in again, because here was a delegation who were high level, verifiable from an actual country, right? Who told me that their Secret Service had verified everything and that, and they wanted to work with me. What was this constitution we were working on? Could we get in touch after the conference? Could they work with the Australian delegation more closely? And, how are we going to do all of this? What is your vision of it? And, we need to learn about this OPPT and all this sort of stuff, and you need to teach us. And so, this was all, wow, it's real, and, we sign our document and Sino's holding up a printing plate for US dollars. He's got he had a printing plate for US dollars in his hand, or I don't know, probably fake, as a lot of stuff, around Asian parts.
Isn't it worth saying something about that at this stage? Because, you told me about seeing the bonds and also seeing, Are you coming to that?
Yeah, that's where I'm coming to now, because the bonds and the gold is the next thing. That is really, so this Australian guy who took his friend with the bond to Indonesia before we went to Indonesia was there. And he was given one of these bonds by Sino, so that he could take this to Australia, and he was to go to a certain bank at a certain time and fill in their certain paperwork. And he was going to get this $35 million, which would be enough to give to the delegation so that the delegates could get established and that we could, until the payments were released, this was going to be like an interim sort of thing. And this guy obviously chickened out of taking the thing to the bank, because you don't kind of walk into a bank with a 1928 $200,000 treasury note and say, into a Commonwealth bank in Melbourne, Australia, and say, can you cash this for me, mate? G'day, how are you, mate? Can you cash this for me? It's worth about roughly 200 million, mate. Just open a new account for me, will you, mate? Here's my passport. So he chickened out, and he brought the bond back to Indonesia, and that's where I saw that first bond. And then I talked to Ross about it, and Ross said when I paid for him to go to Indonesia the first time, he had to make room to have somewhere to work at. He was staying at Sugi's house at that stage, or Sino's house, and he was looking to make a spot where he could set up his laptop and make a bit of a desk, and he was stacking up all these boxes, right? And all these boxes were full of these bonds, stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks of these bonds, right? And so when I got back to Australia, I started researching these bonds, and then that's more cracks appeared, because when I started researching these bonds, I saw that, yes, like you said before, it's happened in the 30s. They went and scavenged all this gold and gave people these worthless bonds that they were never, ever intending to actually honour. It's like, giving the North American Indians a bag of beads and some promises of stuff for New York or something like that,
Farrell makes a very interesting point, Dr. Joseph P. Farrell, is he says, why would anybody counterfeit an $8 note? So he says, if these bonds are all fakes, then why would anybody bother? So he reckons that there actually are some authentic bonds.
I reckon so, because they do have all the hallmarks, and I've seen pictures. I did extensive research into those particular treasury notes, and they were notes that were used before there was any wiring of money, obviously. Banks had to settle between each other in the major cities in America, and these bonds, they're not bonds, they're treasury notes. And these treasury notes were used, these large denomination treasury notes were used to do the settlement between banks. Because banks would be, either telegraphing money to and fro, and then they had to actually settle in notes. There were no electronic accounts. There were promises that were sent out via telegraph, and then at the end of the day they had to pack it all up and courier these big notes to and fro all these banks. And this is what these large denomination treasury notes were set up to do. And here's Ross telling me that there's boxes and boxes and boxes and boxes and boxes of them, taking photos, sending me photos. Mm-hmm. I actually did see them a little bit, but it didn't click. And then when Sugi was trying to get this other Australian guy to cash this bond in Australia, and then I saw the bond in Indonesia, and then Ross's story about all these bonds, and then it started to click. You said, well, maybe this guy actually thinks that he owns everything, because I've got all these bonds that over 100 years of interest, not 100 years, but close to 100 years of interest, a $200,000 bond was worth $200 million. So maybe all these stacks and stacks and stacks of bonds is what he actually bases it on. And maybe he's just like, maybe these honourable Asian royals have been conned by these scrupulous Western operatives into giving them their gold for worthless bond that were never meant to be honoured. And now this guy is asking them to honour these bonds, and that's why he's getting these delegations. And I'm thinking maybe the whole UBS stories and the gold in the ground is what we call in Australia a furphy, which means a myth. Furphy was a machine in Australia. There's a company called Furphy, and they built machines to spread manure. So it was, if something is a furphy in Australia, it means it's a crock of shit being spread. And I thought, this is maybe a furphy. Maybe this is all based on these certificates, and that to this day is still my best guess, that this is all based on those treasury notes. He's saying, you give us these treasury notes with the promise to pay with interest, and I want to make good on that promise now, and then I want to rule the world and have all the money and own everything and, give all these people this money. Maybe it's as innocent as that. I don't know. But when I got back in Australia, there were still people from the delegation lingering because I had family commitments and, people had commitments. So we set ourselves, people have lingered in Indonesia. So John and I set ourselves, this is when we arrive, this is when the conference is, and this is when we leave. So we'd booked our tickets that we had to go at that stage so we wouldn't get caught by the Indonesia bug, like people did. They hung around there for months and months and months. And so we said we won't do that. So we left a little bit earlier than most other delegates, and we left kind of, these cracks appeared, these cracks the niggling, the Hopium was just not holding anymore.
So you two guys were flying back on the same flight or not?
Yeah, we were back on the same flight with the other two people that
So had you begun to talk about the cracks amongst yourselves?
John and I did, yes. Okay. John and I did. And I was still, and John and I and the other two delegates did. And the other two delegates were Rena Eliades and Robert Fletcher. I'll name them because they've put themselves out there in interviews and stuff. Rena is now the Empress of Australia, and Robert is some sort of senior something. And they were sort of trying to fill our cracks, basically. And then I kind of got swayed by them, and I got back into the spiritual hype. I'd actually developed pneumonia in Indonesia as well, so I was very feverish and a little bit
hallucinatory. What too much Hopium will do to you, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So I was on the Hopium and I was having a high fever as well, and I kind of just gave in again and buried again because I was so committed for so long. I buried that again, and John couldn't. He was standing very strong. I didn't come here for Venus Project. Some stuff is wrong here, but sort of by the end of the trip, he'd kind of sort of gone back into the fold as well. But to see somebody that you've worked with for 20 hours a day, who you love and expect and admire, and is one heck of a project manager, one heck of an organizer, one heck of a just all-round amazing human being, and a person who can step into a hot situation where there's a big fight going on and with a few words get everybody calm and on board, sort out the conflict. Amazing guy. So I hold him in very high esteem. Still a very good friend of mine. He's not in Swissindo anymore either, really. And for him to have had those big cracks and my little crack, it started to add up too much. And then once I got back, I started talking to Ross, and Ross was getting cracks, and he was the most committed of us all, brilliant leader, honest man, and a man who was way too honest. And he was actually deposed in a coup, because I think my theory is that he got in touch with a daughter of one of the Indonesian delegates who loved watching MacGyver shows and spoke good English, taught herself English from watching MacGyver. And Ross, in his get stuff done way, managed to get a hold of her and make her part of the Australian delegation, so we would have an actual translator that was on the ground in Cirebon and who spoke English and Indonesian and the dialect that they speak there as well fluently, so we actually have a good translator. And then some stories came through to Ross via her, because she was a bit of a skeptic. Her father was into it, and therefore she had to serve her father's wants and needs. That's a cultural, traditional thing. The child, does what the parent wants. And so she had her doubts. And so she picked up some stories of Sino's right-hand man needing to go to Cirebon and telling people that there was this date set, the money was going to be released, he just needed money to get to Cirebon and blah, 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 blah. And he had, under false pretenses, appropriated money and borrowed money from people based on this release date. And this was another release date that we were given that didn't happen again. And And then Ross was kind of going, well, I've heard this rumor that he's done this, and then happens to coincide with the next release date. The next release date happens to be thwarted this time. It was the Deutsche Bank or something like that had screwed up. It wasn't a Deutsche Bank, it was somebody else. Look, there's too many of these screw-ups that I don't remember every detail. And Ross was going, hang on a minute, but I hear this story that he's been conning people to get money to go to Cherubon and not have to work and stuff like that through my new translator. And so Ross was so honest that he actually rang up Sugi on Skype and said, is this true? You know? Because if this is true, mate, I don't have nothing to fucking do with you. That's the kind of way that Ross speaks, but he's just a very intelligent man. And so, all of a sudden there was a coup and Ross was deposed as Australian Emperor and Rena Iardis was appointed by God to be the new Empress. So Ross is out of it. He's been out of it and still a close friend of mine to this day, a man who I enormously admire. He had integrity, you know, all the people, and this is the thing, all the people with integrity were all shoved aside, and all the people that were the blatant opportunists who were loudmouth blatant opportunists were given all these highfalutin positions because they shouted the loudest. See, they were blatant opportunists. They shouted the loudest. Somebody who's an achiever doesn't go shouting, they go achieving, right? You know that from business. You know, somebody who's an achiever is not boasting, he's achieving. He's busy doing stuff, he's not talking about it. You know,
and so you can see from this that the organization is really designed to, you know, reward the loudmouths and put them forward and not the guys who are actually doing things.
Exactly right. And then, you know, he'd give somebody power of attorney and they'd bandy around with his document. Look, Sugi's giving me power of attorney over the whole project. And then somebody else would come along and he'd get power of attorney of attorney. And then he'd be banding his paper around going power of attorney. Karen Collins was given power of attorney. Then Daryl Zeleny was given power of attorney of attorney. And then the other Australian guy, whom I'm not going to name, because I really, you know, anyway, he was given the, he was Sugi's, reincarnated brother from a past life. And Ron Van Dyke was Sugi's reincarnated father from a previous life. Karen Collins was, Queen Wilhelmina reincarnated, which is funny because Karen Collins is in her mid-60s and Wilhelmina only died 40 years ago, so...
doesn't work, does it?
Yeah, so he was giving all these people titles and telling them who they were in past lives and, you know, this whole spiritual thing. He started playing the spiritual thing when he saw that the delegations were all sort of spiritual muppets, basically, and started playing that game more and more and more. And then the more he played that game, the more repugnant it became to me because I knew that wasn't true spirituality. It didn't rhyme with that vision I had of oneness of everything. And so, you know, that meaning was long gone, that piece from that vision was long gone, and I was sitting there in Australia after this trip and I recovered from my flu and pneumonia and I started looking at these bonds and all these Swissindo Indonesia guys were posting all these bonds online and, you know, Ross's story about the right-hand Mendocino getting money from Indonesians, and I'm thinking one of the things that got me convinced too is that nobody asked me for money, because usually when you get into some sort of an organisation, there is that, yeah, you can have this money later, but have you got some
come sooner or later, but
yeah.
You weren't being bitten, but someone else was, maybe.
Yeah, I'm thinking, and I cannot verify this, but I'm thinking that these well-to-do middle-class and upper-class Indonesians that I saw on top of that roof are paying big money, because Sukarno is such a mythical figure in Indonesia. And is it the Green Hilton? What am I thinking
of?
of?
It's a term that's waved around a lot as something that might have saved the U.S. and Kennedy or whatever.
Well, what happened was in 1944, at the end of World War II, the Green Hilton Agreement was signed at the conference of, and I can't for the life of me think where the conference was. It was in the States anyway, and so what that entailed was that because we were rebuilding at the end of World War II, and America was not running a deficit, so America would stay pegged to the gold, the American currency, and all the other currencies in the world would peg themselves on the American dollar, and the American dollar would be the world's exchange currency. This is this is the conference that in '44 set all that in motion.